So please introduce yourself.
My name is Paul Sawan, aka K.A.S.P. K.A.S.P stands for Keeping Alive Stories for the People. I built my career working with youth.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Which is different because I wasn't expecting that, right? I was just all about music, right?
This is for the ones with their fists in the air, missing in the murder from here to there, seeking out justice and it don't seem fair. Push to the side, man, y'all don't care. This is for the ones with their fists in the air, fighting for the land that was already theirs, seeking out justice and it don't seem fair. Push to the side, man, y'all don't care.
When I share my story, like I said, I talk about my dad being like a heroin addict, right? And an ex-drug dealer who sold drugs to get drugs. And yeah, it's quite the story. I mean, my dad beat up my mom, locked her in the house with just a house coat, didn't let her leave anywhere, used to beat her up. It was bad, right? And then my mom wanted a son, so my dad's like, okay, and out I came pretty much, right?
His parents were, very much caught up in their addictions and, living a street life, very harsh, very violent. He witnessed that as a child on a continuous basis, and it's going to have an impact on you. There's no doubt about it.
When I was born, I almost died, right? They had hooked me up to a machine and stuff, and they had to, inject me with morphine, and my dad pretty much told my mom, if he dies, you're dead. And so my mom, naturally left, right? Naturally just didn't want nothing to do with him. And, fast forward, my dad took me. He used to always tell me, like, hey, don't come into the kitchen, otherwise I'm gonna give you a licking. He's already beating me up, right? But I think I was in grade 5. And I was on my way to school, and, I'd always make an announcement, hey, Dad, can I get a drink of water before I go to school? And, there was no answer. And I was like, Dad, could I get a drink of water, And there was no answer, and I looked over and I peeked in, and I was like, Dad, and he was lying there, right, on the chair, and he had a needle hanging out of his arm, and, the belt, and that's the first time I discovered he was a heroin addict, right? Seen a lot, seen people die, well, specifically seen him die in front of me a few times overdosing, seen my first dead body when I was, grade 5, grade 4, right, just people coming in and out of my house. When he didn't get heroin, he beat me up. Broomsticks, extension cords, bare fists and such. And, he used to hide his drugs under my bed and stuff. And so, that was my normal. My 2 cousins, they molested me from the time I was 3 till I was 6 years old, right? So I had all this stuff, right? Everything he made went into his veins, so we never had food. There'd be times I wouldn't eat for like weeks at a time, right? My dad would always say, oh, don't cry, I'll give you something to cry about, right? So I never really showed emotion.
Scared, lost, hurt, fearful.
He beat me up pretty bad. Next day I go to school and my buddy taps me on the back and I was like, oh, and he's like, what's wrong? And he's like, did your dad give you a licking again? I was like, yeah. And he grabbed me by my head and hit me and he whipped me up. He taught me how to be codependent. He taught me how to lie, cheat, steal, manipulate. 33 foster homes, 13 group homes, later. And pretty much got screwed by the system, aged out and had nowhere else to go, didn't know how to cook, clean, pay bills or anything. Originally I wanted to be a basketball player, originally I wanted to do that stuff, be the first native in the NBA and what have you, but instead, the creator had something else planned for me, which was hip-hop music and motivational speaking.
I had my own little place. I was kind of a little on the downside, so I needed to get out of the house. I went down to the beach. I was hanging out there for a bit. I ran into a friend who was overly intoxicated and being followed by a gentleman. Didn't know who he was or what he was about or anything along those lines. She needed a place to stay, and he ended up coming along as well. She slept on the couch. He tried to sleep with her, and she wasn't having it. He slept in the living room. That young gentleman was Rob. He was definitely a loose cannon. especially with his relationships. He ended up eventually having a relationship with Elaine Alec.
I was leaving an abusive relationship, and I came home for the holidays. I went to a club and I saw him dancing.
I met her in Penticton. How old are you, she asked. I'm like, oh, I'm 22. And she's like, I'm like, how old are you? She's like, oh, I'm 22. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I lied to her, right? So it started off toxic right away.
I was in such a bad state at the time. I was actively drinking. I was really depressed and dealing with a lot of issues that I was trying to run away from. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I didn't want to be with anybody long term. And people told me to stay away from him because he tended to get around. He didn't have a great reputation. And so they said, oh, you don't want to be with him. That guy runs around. And I said, oh, that's perfect.
It was toxic, meaning that like she was going through her stuff and I was going through my stuff. But at that time, we didn't know. We didn't know what healthy was.
He was just such in an angry state. We couldn't have a conversation without him going off on a tangent. He just was really hard to have conversations with because there was just an issue with everything.
She cheated on me, I cheated on her, you know.
That was kind of their dynamic of their relationship at the time.
In the first few years of our relationship, they were really foggy. Like, I don't think either of us really remember a lot of it. I had a son who was about 3 years old who was living with his grandparents just down the road from me. They had him because I just drank so much. I drank away all my money. I couldn't pay my bills a lot. I didn't have a lot of food. K.A.S.P and I were together for 14 years. I think we were married for about six of those 14.
I remember walking down this alley, right? I remember it was this alley in East Vancouver, and my nephew was staying with me at the time, and I kicked this tape. And when I saw the tape, I picked it up, and I was like, you see that? He's just like, yeah. I'm like, what does it say? He's like, I don't know. So we ran home, put the tape in, put it on, pushed play, and we're waiting to hear it. And all of a sudden, the first words I heard were cruising down the street in my 6'4", right? And so it was NWA. That's when I fell in love with hip hop music, you know?
So I met K.A.S.P. We were about 18, 19 years old in Penticton.
And I used to always freestyle in Penticton on the beach. Like I used to walk up and down that beach, the one that's on the lakeside there.
I would go with him to his shows. He would have these battles, rap battles, and so many people would come just to see him.
One day we just happened to be going down the beach, hanging out was like the thing to do. Some mutual friends we knew were like, hey, you gotta check this guy out, he raps. Because at the time I was DJing, making beats, producing.
And so I seen him at the back of his truck, and I was like, hey, you're that native DJ, hey? And he's like, yeah, you're that native rapper guy, hey? And I was like, yep. And then, yeah, we just connected, and you know, we did a couple house parties, right? Did a couple hall shows.
As soon as he did his, it started his rap career. That's when everything really started to take off for him.
And then all of a sudden we started this group, Seventh Generation.
It's time to get down with the 7th Generation sound. It's dedicated to the underground. Crazy cuts, what? Crazy cuts, what? Crazy cuts, crazy cuts, what?
Started creating songs and music, and one thing led to another, and we're doing albums.
He'd say, hey, I'm gonna be performing at this place, or hey, I'm battling, here. And everybody came to see him. And when he would be done, I'd say, well, how much money did you make? And he'd say, oh, I didn't get any money. And they were charging door fees for people to come watch, and he didn't get any of that. I remember telling him, you should be getting a percentage of that.
When Elaine was like, yeah, you can get paid for this. I was like, what? Somebody pay me for music?
If it wasn't for Elaine and her stepping in as the manager and being able to book times and book places and recording times and all that sort of stuff, she actually really helped with a lot of that.
21 nominations that we have, with 18 of those we won.
Yeah, the rest is history. I mean, we've won awards, native and non-native, and nominated for 11, 12 awards.
I know that he's been traveling coast to coast to coast.
to us, he's Rob. You know, he's not K.A.S.P, he's Rob. You know, he's always been Rob. And like, oh, everyone's like, oh yeah, that's Rob. You know, he's famous.
We both decided to be sober, and I started working and feeling really good about myself. And that was at the kind of the height of his career, was when we decided to get married.
They were really open to the idea.
I had the honor of marrying him.
We had said we were going to stay faithful. We were going to really try to make it work. We wanted to smarten up.
A hero in my own mind, my own mind. A hero in my own mind, my own mind. A hero in my own mind, my own mind. A hero in my own mind, my own mind. Baby, I'm on the road. Baby, I'm on the road. Baby, I'm on the road.
I was really trying to stay sober, and they were just parties. Like, it was just one big party. And then, you know, there were groupies kind of hanging out. And we had this thought that we can't let people know he's in a relationship because those groupies buy his CDs. And so he acted single and I stayed away. I knew he had a problem with flirting, and so he was always flirting, and I let it go because that was part of the business.
He wasn't always the most stable, you know, individual.
Volcanic, very volcanic. It's in here, and when it comes out, it comes out.
For a long time there, we were hiding a lot of the addictions, a lot of the problems that were going on. We were out drinking, partying, you know, doing a lot of those things and hiding it from the people that were hiring us, from the public image. We hid everything else, right?
You know how in this Facebook age, how it's all a popularity thing, or this social media? Well, back in the day, you know, we couldn't just put up our song. You know, we had to work. It was this ego-driven, right?
He ended up cheating on me while he was at a big award show, and then left me after being married for about, a year.
Things changed when the group got so dysfunctional that we couldn't function as a group anymore, and we all sort of had to go our own ways.
He fell off the wagon.
I didn't drink to hang out. I drank to forget everything, so I drank to get drunk. And so if I started, I'm like, yeah, see you in 2 weeks.
He started just running around Edmonton. He was running around with some of the gangs there.
3 2-6s a day, lying, cheating, stealing, almost got killed. Almost got hit by a couple trucks because I was so drunk drinking outside of Williams Lake. I ended up in the north end of Winnipeg, ended up in East Vancouver with a bunch of gangs. Like, when I say gangs, I mean, like, you know, they were hardcore guys.
Yeah, there was times I was worried about him because he was on a self-destructive path. And that was after the group had all split up and we all went our own ways.
He was so close to death. Like, he was so depressed. He was running away. He was harming himself. He wasn't eating. That was like the lowest point of his life. Like, he was so ready to die. Like, he was so ready to not be here anymore.
We all need to heal, and we all deserve to heal.
I woke up 6 months later and I answered my phone and she's like, hey. I'm like, who is this? She's like, it's your wife. I was like, oh. And I'm half drunk and stuff. And I'm like, what do you want? And she's like, oh, your son misses you and he loves you. And that hit me. I see her in the lobby and she has her arms crossed and she's smiling. And I'm sitting there and my clothes are all ripped up, you know, jeans are full of like just dirty, right? I just look rough.
I didn't even recognize him. He had new piercings. He was really pale. He had gained a lot of weight and he looked really puffy and sick.
And I thought she was gonna have like her friends or whoever their uncles and cousins at that time, you know. I thought she was gonna get me beat up. But instead she gave me this huge hug and she's like, I love you and everything's gonna be okay.
I remember walking up to him and I gave him a rock and I said, you are a man worthy of love and forgiveness. And he just looked at me and he was like, did you go to Choices? And I said, yeah.
Choices is a program that actually came out of Texas with a lady named Thelma Box and Dr. Phil. It's an incredible program because it's really intense, but it helps you leave your past behind.
I phoned some of the people at Choices and I said, I'm gonna get my ex-husband to come. And they said, okay, just give us his number. And so I gave them his number and they called him and they said, hey, are you ready to change your life? And that was the beginning of it.
I was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna go through this program, this seminar. I'm gonna make everybody else happy. I'm gonna do the do, and then I'm gonna go back to drinking. There's all these people in suits. So I put on this act and just being cocky and smarty. And then this elder walks up to me. She's like, is your life a joke? I'm like, excuse me? And I was like, what? And I thought she was just joking around. And she's like, no. She's like, you're taking your life as a joke. Is your life a joke? And I was like, no. And long story short, yeah, that was 5 days that like changed my life.
When him and his wife actually broke up, I called them both. I said, what's going on? And they both, explained their sides of it.
We ended up agreeing to reconcile. We were told, if you want out of this marriage, you have to earn your way out. You're not allowed to run away. You're not allowed to hurt each other like that. If you want to really move on with your lives, you need to earn your way out of this. And so that's what we did. We went to AA meetings like 3 times a week. We went to counseling, and then I got pregnant. They say in Choices, when you go through a big life change, when you've dealt with that trauma and you're kind of on that high from like doing that really hardcore work, they say don't make any important life decisions for the first 90 days. By then I was already pregnant. We were both on the high and we were like, we're so in love and this is gonna work out great. And then after the high, it was like, oh, this probably wasn't a very good idea, but we were going to stay together anyway. By the time I was 6 months pregnant, we knew that it wasn't going to work. He said, I'm happy having a family. And I said, I was too. I could live like this forever too. But don't you ever want to be held and loved and somebody like passionately loving you and like having a real relationship? Like, don't you want to be loved like that? And so we decided that we were going to keep living with each other in separate spaces and slowly uncouple. And it was hard because people had their judgments about us and our relationship, and it was just that attitude that people had that 2 people couldn't make a decision like that for their kids.
We'll do this co-parenting thing. And the co-parenting thing is what ends up working in between the two the most. And his greatest milestone is definitely his child.
He's such an inspiration for us to watch him grow and inspire others.
I believe my new challenges is just getting people to find the value in life and in all things. So that's my new good challenge.
He is where he should be. Just keep doing what he's doing because we need him to help our young people be the best they're meant to be.
He's so gifted when it comes to youth.
He stands in front of 40, 50 kids or 50 youth.
When I do my workshops, it's groups. That's when you help people find their gifts, right? There's nowhere to go. You have to face yourself. You have to work, right? There's no excuses. I call it expressing yourself through music and culture. And what it pretty much is taking the 4 elements of like hip hop music, and how they relate with our culture, right, with Indigenous culture. Teach life skills, be real with them, 100% real with them, let them know that what they've been through, I most likely either been through it or seen it. And so, you know, don't BS me and I won't BS you, and I want to be, you know, work with you the best way that I can.
He just knows when somebody needs that support. He's always going to be that person that's going to go that extra mile to make sure that a kid knows that they're loved and cared for.
The most inspiring thing that I've witnessed is the growth of him from when I first met him, being a wild, crazy young adult, to having a family and kids and growing up and seeing all the struggles in between.
I'm just so proud of him. Like, I'm just so proud of him because I saw how he was and where he started from.
He's the greatest. And you can never doubt that.
I do my best to acknowledge where I live, to acknowledge my teachings, to acknowledge the land where I'm at, you know, and just to give back any way I can. And that's where K.A.S.P comes from, right? Keeping lives right for the people.